There are answers. Sometimes you find them, sometimes you don't. When I was about 10, I was fishing in the middle of my granddad's farm lake near the Delaware Water Gap. It was a blue sky day in June, and it was hot. Normally, I would have headed back to the house for some chocolate cupcakes that my grandmother used to make us boys most every afternoon. But it was on just such a day the previous year that I had landed the biggest fish I had ever caught, a 6¼ pound chain pickerel on a yellow hula popper. That fish was a 1/4 inch longer than the almanac world record for a pickerel at that time. But the record fish weighed over 9 pounds, and weight is what they go by. Personally, I think that almanac fish should have been x-rayed for buckshot, but I guess that's another story. So I was reluctant to head in, and I kept casting in one of the good spots out in the middle of the lake, now using a custom green and black torpedo lure which I had set up with spinners fore and aft. Except for something really big, I knew I wasn't going to catch anything out there, but as you know, if you are one, that never stops a true fisherman. There was a heavy, plunging splash in the water just off the bow of the boat. Somebody throwing a rock at me? Not likely. I was way out in the middle of the lake. Nobody can throw a big rock that far. I didn't see or hear anything before the hit. There was just the hit. I know my splashes, and I couldn't begin to imagine what had caused that one. It was quite close to the boat, so I couldn't really see anything below the surface. It didn't make much in the way of ripples. It was more like a heavy spear had hit. I reeled in and stepped up to the bow for a look. There was a narrow, streaming shaft of bubbles twisting down into the murk below. The lake was shallow there, maybe 6 feet. I could almost see the bottom, but not quite. A small cannonball? I looked directly up at the vacant blue sky. A cannonball rolled out the back of a passing airplane? There wasn't a speck or flash of silver in the sky. It was obviously something very heavy, but not very big. An actual cannonball? Shot from some kind of state fair or football game? Nothing like that around. A rogue cannon in somebody's backyard? Some kind of Civil War reenactment isolationist? Really? Could some sort of uranium-eating turtle have crawled onto the nose of the boat without me noticing and then plunged into the lake for its own good reason? Was there some kind of small but heavy-bodied diving bird that had gone unreported in those parts? If so, where was he now? I could see the stream of bubbles. Whatever it was went down fast, heavy, and didn't come back up. A cannonball. It must have been a cannonball, not a bowling ball, maybe a duckpin bowling ball, or even a billiard ball, if it had some propulsion behind it. No, simple. Somebody threw a rock at me, but I was 100 yards from shore in the dead middle of the lake. Could somebody have rigged up some kind of platform in the lake and stood up and thrown a big rock at me and then ducked back down? I did have an enemy, a kid who lived down the valley and sometimes came by to torment me, asking me questions about fishing. Although that had actually happened only a few times in the last 5 years, he must have been in reform school the rest of the time. There would have been waves, noise from such a platform contraption. Plus, he would have been up crowing and laughing as I was looking around. Some kind of beaver or leaden bottom-feeding mullet-type fish that could jump out of the water without me hearing it and then crash convulsively back down through the surface and disappear? But I knew lake sounds. I would have heard it leave the surface going up, and that itself would have left ripples. Had somebody left an anvil on the front seat of the boat that I hadn't noticed, which had somehow flipped up into the air and crashed into the water? It had to be some kind of animal, a leaping otter plunging back down. But as I say, I know my lake sounds. That thing was heavy, metal or rock, small and solid. It came from high up and it went down fast. The narrow shaft of bubbles toward the bottom somehow indicated pulverizing, atomizing speed and mass. A meteor? But there was no heat or steam. I had had no experience with small meteors hitting near me in a lake, but I just didn't think that was it. A meteor would have some kind of heat envelope around it, wouldn't it? And it would make some kind of sizzling sound in the air. This thing was dead quiet on approach and after. It was very distinctly different from any lake sound I had heard before. Needless to say, I don't go with some kind of spooky UFO thing funning with me. I never believed that stuff or found it very interesting. It's not really an answer. I think that's what they call a swerve these days in philosophy, an explanation of something baffling, which is even more baffling and is also impervious to analysis. In my world, something heavy hit the water straight down from high up, and it could be identified. That it was not yet identified was irrelevant. That it became a lifelong cognitive search for explanation, likewise irrelevant. I did keep trying over the years. A heavy wrench fell off the wing of a small plane, and the plane was too high up to be seen. But you can almost always catch a glint of sun or hear a buzz of an engine. A glider. Somebody was working on a glider and left a heavy tool on the wing, and it fell off over me. And the glider was higher up than gliders usually go. A possibility. Or just a higher than usual hot air balloon. Again, a possibility. Of course, if it was today, I would have ascribed it to a drone. Whether friend or foe, intentional or not, I wouldn't have known. But that wasn't part of it all back then. Helicopter? I didn't see or hear one. That's when I got the obvious idea. I had drifted a bit, but I rode back more or less to the spot. Tragically, I couldn't quite find it. The bubbles had dispersed. But the visibility was pretty good from this new angle, and I could see the bottom. I plunged an oar into the bottom muck and probed around. I didn't feel anything that was unduly solid. Of course, if the splash was a living creature, then it would have swum away by then. And I had to admit I wasn't sure I had the exact right spot. Maybe the thing was so heavy it drove itself 10 feet down in the bottom bog. Could there have been some kind of tectonic event from below that sucked something down from the surface in a bubbly column? Seemed a little desperate. What about the bubbles? Is there something in the pattern that would have indicated speed, momentum, shape? Later in life, when I saw a real bubble chamber in a physics lab, I thought, that's what it was like. Some sort of preternaturally heavy particle streaking through a dense medium. Maybe it was a rogue boson from some crippled star that slammed through some barrier at the water surface. Bit of a stretch. So I've never known what it was. But over the years, I have occasionally returned to wondering. Keep in mind that I'm ignoring the possibility that I just imagined it all. That's right, I'm ignoring that. There are all these theories about memory. If you revisit the memory, you alter it. You get back to the hill you used to roll down when you were 3 years old, and it's only a small dent in the yard. My memory is not like that. I never recall anything different from the way I've always recalled it. Whenever I go back to the hill where I was 3 in the yard, I'm always amazed at how high it is. I remember the sound of that splash with perfect fidelity, the finality of a heavy rock or bullet-like cannonball hitting the water. It was soundless on approach. I guarantee I heard nothing. It was like an ashtray falling off a table. You sense it has happened. You hear it. You look over there. There it is. It has happened. You don't know why. But there was no ashtray on the rug to explain it. Sometimes I've wondered over the years, what if I really did want to find out what that thing was? If there really was some kind of projectile out there in the mud on the bottom of the lake, I have more resources now. I could go back there and check into it. I could buy some kind of underwater device that might detect metal or dense mass. I could drain the lake. I could hire a team of guys with equipment to find it, if it's there. I could also get arrested or committed. What if I found something that could be it? I wouldn't know if it really was it. Actually, finding something that could have been it probably would be good enough. Anyway, time passes. Other stuff happens. I wasn't traumatized or hurt by whatever it was. I certainly didn't think about it all the time, even when I was back in the area, fishing or walking on the land. But once I was walking up on the ridge on the far side of the lake, and I came across an unusual flat area big enough for a small house site. There were old split trunks, presumably from a storm, and lengths of wood that could conceivably have been cut by human hands. I was instantly and madly struck, even though I hadn't thought about it for years. Somebody set up a big catapult up there. They took a shot at me, hundreds of yards away down in the valley. I could see the lake easily through the leaves. I had forgotten how immediately this mystery was for me, and it scared me a bit that I was accepting how reasonable that catapult explanation actually seemed to be. More decades passed. The old farm was sold. I didn't visit anymore. I moved to Tennessee and took to walking in new mountains and around new lakes. But just last week, I solved it. After all this time, I now know what hit the water off the bow of my fishing boat in the middle of that lake in the 60s. But first, some intermediate reasoning. I had been working on a theory on and off over the years. If you're familiar with the airline commute from Chicago to New York, you may recall that LaGuardia-bound flights hit a peak over central PA and then coast down to the city across New Jersey, passing across the Delaware just south of the Water Gap. I used to take the trouble to reserve a left side window seat because I could almost always see my granddad's farm and lake just to the north of that flight path. On one daylight flight, we strayed slightly more north than usual, and I noticed on the far side of a steep ridge a big open pit mine, like a giant gravel quarry. There were intermediate geyser-like puffs of whitish dust in the quarry bowl that I took to be blasting. It looked like stuff was being blown moderately high into the air. I took a look at Google Earth and saw that quarry is less than 2 airline miles over the high ridge to the northeast of the lake. You probably see where I'm going here. There are theories in statistical physics and thermodynamics about particle motions in steady-state systems not to mention collisions that allow for individual outlier particles to move much faster and farther than the average state of the system. Like in a waterfall, there are some drops that bounce halfway back up the falls, or even all the way back up. If I could establish that that quarry was operational back in the 60s, I might have my rock, a statistical rogue from a quarry explosion too far away to hear. Now, how to establish that that quarry was in business back in the 60s? It came to me almost like a meteor hit or a shooting star. I remembered a strange story from that time. A big truck loaded with snakes, stick with me here for a second, blew up on a back road from explosives connected to a quarry somehow. As a 10-year-old kid, I was used to hearing this kind of talk. What's next? We're all doomed, etc., from adults. So I didn't pay much attention, but I did remember it, probably because of the ridiculous concatenation of events and the enticing idea of a snake pit with all kinds of poisonous snakes at large. I realized just last week that if I could locate a newspaper account of that story, then I would know that the quarry was operational at that time and my mystery might be solved. I grokked and I found my answer. My theory, of course, was that a heavy rock projectile, a 1 in a billion statistical outlier, blew out of the Google Earth quarry that I had seen from the plane and headed up into the stratosphere on a slightly southwestern cant and rocketed into my lake a couple of airline miles away near the bow of my fishing boat. Too far away to hear a bang, close enough to catch an outlier. And so, if you consult the June 27th, 1964 issue of the Stroudsburg Daily Record, you will read about a freak highway explosion of a truck carrying 26,000 pounds of nitrocarbon nitrate on Route 209 in Marshalls Creek, PA on the previous day. The 40-foot crater took out the nearby Pocono Reptile Farm and several other buildings and scattered poisonous snakes over half the county. My recollection of the quarry connection was in error, except that the pit in the middle of Route 209 was reported in the paper as resembling a quarry. It wasn't that quarry, but there was a quarry connection. Maybe my granddad got that paper and I read that description and somehow absorbed it. I know that he took a paper because we spent quite a bit of time sitting in the car in the bushes out on Route 115 trying to catch whoever it was who was stealing it at the drop point. But that's a detail. I've got my rock, a simple matter of a gigantic nitro snake farm explosion a few airline miles from my quiet location in the middle of a Pocono farm lake on June 26, 1964. I always knew it was an unusual thing. Whatever hit near me, but I knew it was a real thing all that time. A truck with 26,000 pounds of nitro blew a quarry-sized hole in Federal Highway 209 in front of a snake farm. People were killed. My rock was launched. It was too far away to hear the blast. No wonder the fish weren't biting that day.